Let's talk about the hip hinge or deadlift movement pattern. In this video, I'm going to go through a mobility sequence to help you achieve a deeper hip hinge no matter which deadlift variation you're performing, and help those tissues prepare to load the hips rather than the spine. So let's improve the hip flexion or the bending at the hip. And let's improve the separation between the hip movement and bracing the spine in that hip hinge. So we'll be using 2 sticks if you have them available. If you don't, you can hold onto a wall for most of the movements that we'll be doing. And let's get started. So we're gonna start with just figuring out where this hip hinge is. So you're gonna start in a tall standing position with the sticks at 11 and 1 o'clock, holding them at chest height. And if you're holding onto the wall, you just wanna be an arm's length away. And then you're going to reach the hips up and back, softening the knees. And I really just want you to fall into a passive hip hinge and think about dropping that chest down through the arms. Now, if this is difficult, if you feel like you can't bring the chest down through the arms, hold the sticks a little bit higher so that the hinge is a little bit shallower and we can achieve that extended spine. So basically we just don't want rounding of the spine as you go into this position. So once we are there, we're just going to kind of feel out the legs and the hips first. So I want you to look down at your feet, spread out your toes, make sure you've got a nice wide base on those feet. And then we're just gonna bend and extend the knees. So you're gonna just send those knees forward in space. And then as you extend the knees, try to keep that torso down towards the floor and see if you can almost find a hamstring stretch as you straighten those knees. And then let's bend the knees again. Just flossing this movement, extending the knees, trying to get a nice hamstring stretch there. And let's go one more time, bending the knees and extend. Then soften the knees again, but try to maintain that bend of the hips that you found with that hamstring stretch. So we still want some lengthening of the hamstrings even though the knees are now soft. Now let's address the lower back. So I want you to maintain this position of the legs. So imagine that we just put your legs in cement. They're just going to stay there. And now we're going to bend and extend the lower back. So I want you to purposely round that lower back. So think of scooping your tailbone underneath you and almost pulling your belly button away from the floor. And then I want you to actively extend that lower back. So you're going to tip your tailbone out behind you and overextend or hyperextend that lower back. That may push that ribcage down towards the floor, which is fine. We're just going into some end ranges of that spine movement. So we're scooping that tailbone under, rounding through that lower back, finding some movement while these hips are in this flexed position. And then extend that spine, tipping that tailbone out and up behind you. And then let's go one more time. So notice how when you extend the spine, you're gonna find that hamstring stretch again. So if you had a hard time finding that hamstring stretch before, it could be because that lower back was round. So we want that lower back to be nice and extended here, which is going to help us brace the spine for our deadlifts. So now let's fix this overarched position. So because we have that spine extended, our tailbone is reaching up and back, but now the rib cage is flared and I'm really feeling a lot of tension in my back, which obviously we don't want in a deadlift. So I want you to press those sticks down into the floor, which is gonna pull that rib cage away from the floor, retracting the ribs, taking some of the spine out of extension, but I want you to maintain some extension in the lower back. So don't push the sticks down so much that your body comes up this way. We're just finding an isometric push. So we're just pushing those sticks down. Imagine you're still trying to tip that tailbone out slightly behind you. And hold. Keep pushing those sticks into the floor for 3, 2. Now see if you can shift your weight back half an inch, which is also going to take some of that movement out of the lower back and load up those hips a little bit more. Then I want you to drive the feet down into the floor, to come out of that position. Let's do all of that again. So we're just isolating the different parts of the body that go into the deadlift, and then we will put it together for the most optimal or efficient deadlift position. So let's just bring that chest down towards the floor. If that hinge felt really good, you can lower those hands a little bit more into this rep. Making sure that those feet are nice and wide into the floor. We've got a nice wide base. We're going to bend those knees and then drive the feet into the floor to extend. Now check in with that spine and see if we're rounding in order to straighten those knees. Try not to let the spine affect the hips. So if the spine starts rounding as I start to straighten the knees, I'm just going to go to where I can straighten while keeping that spine extended. And then let's bend the knees again. And extend the knees, trying to find that hamstring stretch. And let's go one more time. Bend. And extend. And then let's soften those knees. And let's move the spine. We're going to flex and round that lower back. And extend, tipping that tailbone out behind you. 2 more, round that lower back. We're doing this in isolation of those knees bending, so the knees and the legs are in concrete, and they're going to stay still while the lower back moves. Round that lower back and extend. Now slide those hands down on the sticks just a few inches. Press those sticks into the floor, pulling the rib cage away. Now we're going to actively hold this hip hinge position. I'm going to ask you to lift the sticks off the floor, and in order to do that, it's going to force you to load the hips instead of that spine. So you're basically going to be, if you're leaning forward on those sticks, I want you to try to lean your weight back slightly, and hopefully that should load your hips rather than your spine. If you're still feeling your spine, you might be up a little bit too high or a little too overarched in that spine. Bring the chest a little lower and drive those sticks down into the floor, which helps pull that rib cage up and in. So as you exhale, we're going to then lift one stick at a time. Try to lift the left stick off the floor or your left hand away from the wall and hold. Keep that arm next to your ear and bring that stick down. Now let's lift the right stick off the floor and hold. Just 1 inch away, keeping that right arm next to the ear, and bring that stick down. Now let's lift both sticks off the floor, really loading those hips here. Try not to let that spine overarch. If you do, just bring those hands down a little lower onto the sticks. Hold, bring those sticks down. And then drive those feet into the floor to come out of it. Okay, so we should have felt a really nice stretch in the hamstrings. Some of those musculature surrounding the spine, the erector spinae, really working hard to help stabilize and support that spine in that hip hinge position. And we should have felt those glutes really, really loading up in that movement. So now that we're all warmed up, let's go in and out of that hip flexion. So we're going to focus on the hip flexion first, or bending at the hip for our deadlift. So we're going to stand on the right leg. Left leg is going to be kicked out just in front of you. The heel of the left foot is going to be in line with the toes of the right foot. So we're not kicked out super far out here, just barely kicking that leg out in front. The sticks are going to be at 11 and 1 or 10 and 2. And you're going to hold them at chest height, again, or holding onto the wall, just an arm's length away. Now you're going to take a hip hinge on the right leg, softening that right knee, and we're going to stretch into the hamstrings on that left leg, bringing the chest down towards the floor. While you're in this position, I want you to actively try to lift further into that hip hinge or that hip flexion on that left leg, almost like you're trying to lift that left leg off the floor. Now, because I'm also bringing my body down to the floor, I'm not actually able to lift this left leg without rounding my spine. So we want to keep that spine nice and extended. You're trying to lift that left leg off the floor to get deeper into that position, really feeling the quads on that left leg. And then you're going to drive the left heel down into the floor to bring those hips back underneath you. That's going to feel the upper part of the hamstring and those glutes back there trying to extend that left hip. And let's do that again. This is kinetic stretching for hip flexion. You're pulling those hips back, trying to lift that leg up into that hip flexion. Feeling those quads and the front of the hip working hard. Then you're going to drive that left heel down into the floor. Press down with that right foot as well to come back up. Let's do that 2 more times. Pulling into that hip flexion, that deadlift position, that hip hinge. Lifting, lifting, lifting that left leg. Drive that left leg into the floor to come on up. And let's go 1 more time. We're lengthening and lifting into that stretch. And then from this deep passive range position, this lengthened position of the hamstring, we are trying to generate force down into the floor to come on up. Let's slowly come out of that and switch sides. So I'll show you from this angle so you can see that supporting leg. So the right leg is going to be kicked out now. And the goal of this movement is to stress the hamstrings in their lengthened position. So we're getting into a deep stretch of the hamstrings. And then from there, isometrically pushing down into the floor to help generate force in that lengthened position, which is exactly what we do in a deadlift. So we're going to pull into that hamstring stretch. As the chest comes down, it's almost like you're trying to lift that leg up off of the floor without rounding the spine. Quads are working hard here, and then we're going to drive down into the floor to come on up. So the right leg is going to stay straight the whole time. That's important. Pull into that stretch. Obviously, in most deadlift variations, the legs are not fully extended, but we're really working that hip. So we want that knee out of the equation. And drive down, at least for this movement, this drill. Pull into that stretch, trying to lift that right leg as the body comes towards it. Take a deep breath. Feel those quads working. Lift, 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 lift. Drive down to come back up. And let's do that 1 more time, pulling into that deadlift, hip hinge, hip flexion on that right leg, trying to lift that right leg up. As you do that, you're going to feel a lot of stress on that left hip as well. And drive down with that heel to come back up. All right, let's release. We're going to do 1 more movement, which is going to groove that hip flexion just a little bit more. And we're going to stem that from a deep squat. So if you don't have sticks to hold on to, you may want to hang in this one. If you have something to hold on to, we're going to be getting into a deep squat. So if you have something heavy that'll allow you to hang those hips down into a deep squat, go ahead and try that out. If you do have sticks, we're going to be facing away from a wall or somewhere where you can anchor those sticks. And then we're going to be holding those sticks at about right next to those hips or slightly in front of those hips. Feet are going to be planted into the floor, just about hip width apart. Doesn't have to be a perfect squat stance because we're going to go into a hinge from there. So we're driving the sticks back into the wall behind you as you pull down into a squat. Now the spine does not need to be extended in this squat. We are just working on getting those knees up towards your armpits. We're working on a deep squat here. Get as low as you can go. And then this relationship between the thigh and the torso, I want you to try to keep that angle as close to the same as you drive the sticks into the wall and lift those hips. So we're getting into a deep hip flexion here, deep hip hinge. Even if the shoulders are beneath the hips, that's okay. We're going to hold here. And then we're going to go back to the squat. Keep driving into that wall behind you, dropping those hips down. You can shift around here if you'd like to help groove that hip flexion into those hips. Keep pressing back into that wall. And as you pull those hips up, I want you to try to extend the spine, keep the relationship between the torso and those thighs. Now make sure here that we're also not hyperextending the spine too much and popping out that rib cage. I want you to keep driving those sticks into the wall and pull that rib cage down towards the hips as we hold. And then let's go back to that squat 1 more time. Deep squat here. Grooving that hip hinge, getting into that deep, deep, deep hip flexion, and maintain that as you push into the wall behind you. Pull that rib cage down, tip that tailbone up. We're really compressing the body here. And then you can soften the knees, lift those shoulders slightly, and come on up. Woo! Okay, bonus exercise just to help groove an actual deadlift pattern. We can keep this wheelbarrow landmine orientation as you go into your deadlift position and push down into the floor to come back up. Or if it's an RDL, bring those feet a little bit closer together as you reach those hips back and come back up. All right, so I hope your hips and hamstrings and spine are ready for your deadlifts, and I hope you learned something today about your hip hinge. If you have any questions, drop them in the comments below, and I'll see you next time.